Hello everyone, back tuning in to today's first video. Going to have a look at some autumn analogues for today's first video in terms of the summer that is very quickly now beginning to draw to a close. So we're going to have a look at some past years that had kind of a similar type pattern to the summer that we've just been experiencing, although actually summer 2017, very difficult summer to pin down in a reanalysis point of view. But we're going to have a look at some sort of front-loaded summers of the past and see what happened in the autumns that followed those front-loaded summers. I'll talk about all that in a second. Before I get on with that, though, just say that later on today, we're going to have the Galsworthy Sunday Roundup. Now, that's going to be the last Sunday Roundup of certainly the next few months. I may bring it back in December, but it might actually be that we don't get the Galsworthy Sunday Round back until the start of next year, actually. The reason for that is that next week we're going to have the autumn 2017 forecast next Sunday. We'll also have a winter sneak peek as well, so we won't have time for the Sunday Roundup next week. And then the week after that, just 2 weeks away, we'll begin the winter update. So we won't be doing the Sunday Roundup while we're doing the winter updates, because they'll be covering kind of like the same ground, so won't be any point doing the Sunday Roundup. So essentially the upshot is later today we've got the final Galsworthy's Sunday Roundup, certainly for the next few months, possibly for this year. So I hope you'll come back for that over lunchtime. And this evening we'll have our, I think it's a 5th update for the late summer bank holiday weekend. So quite a lot going on at the website today. But let's get back to today's first video, which is the autumn analogues video. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing here. We're going to have a look at some years that have front-loaded summers. What I mean by a front-loaded summer is either we had warmer than average temperatures early on in the summer and then it got cooler, or we had above average pressure earlier on in the summer and then pressure sort of went lower in the second half of the summer. So there could be two kind of meanings of a front-loaded summer. Sometimes they will overlap, so you'll have warm and high pressure dominated early summers, but not always is that the case. Sometimes you might have a warm early summer, but actually pressure is quite low. Other times you might have a lot of high pressure through the early summer, but the temperature won't be that warm. So the idea of a front-loaded summer is quite complicated. So we're going to have a look at both front-loaded summers in terms of warmer temperatures earlier in the summer and also higher pressure. As I say, sometimes there will be an overlap. Now, just say this is a little bit controversial, what I'm doing today, because this only really applies to England and Wales, where they've had a front-loaded summer for 2017. In Scotland, and I think probably for Northern Ireland as well, actually the summer's just been dismal from start to finish. You haven't had a front-loaded summer. You didn't get into that warm weather in June that we had further south. So if you're watching this in Scotland, I am aware, if you start telling me off and shouting at me, I am aware that you have had a poor summer in Scotland from start to finish, from beginning of June right through to now, I'm not sort of negating the weather that you've been through up there north of the border. So I am aware that you have had a poor summer from start to finish. We either had to look for these analogues at poor summers throughout, but if we did that, then it wouldn't really apply to what's happening in England and Wales. And we could look at the front-loaded summers as well. And I had to make a choice. I decided in the end probably the most relevant would be front-loaded summers. It would be interesting to know whether summers that are just poor from start to finish look any different to how the front-loaded summers are going to look in terms of the autumn patterns. So, just say that this could be quite a long video. You can't watch it all in one go. Don't worry, you'll be able to come back and watch it whenever you want, because it's going to be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page later on today, probably around 7 o'clock this evening, something like that. I'm usually a bit late doing it, but I will get it up later on today. And that will place on the autumn update page with an extended written report that goes with that as well. So you can't watch the video all in one go. You'll be able to read the written report in any case. And just say a big thanks to James Atquill, who's brought all of this together for me. Essentially, this is James's work, and I'm just the presenter, small wheel in a much larger cog, if you like. So I know James could be watching. Big thank you to James Ackrill for supplying me with the analogues again for this update. So just to talk a little bit about front-loaded summer that we've had in 2017. So in terms of the temperature, first of all, June came out with Central England temperature of 16.0, an anomaly of 1.9 degrees. So that's the front part of the summer, nearly 2 degrees above average. July was still above average. It was warmer than June, but it only came out at 16.8, so just 1/8 of a degree above average, and that's only 0.7 degrees above average. And then August, up to now, provisional to the 17th, actually we're a bit cooler than average at 15.6, an anomaly of nearly 1/2 degree below average. Now, I'm not entirely sure that this August is going to come out cooler than June. It may be that August in the end, because we're going to have quite a few few days coming up, so it could well be that June actually turns out to be the coolest month of the summer, that August might beat June's 16.0. It'd be touch and go, I think, whether that happens. But so that's the reason I wanted to look at both temperatures and also pressure in terms of a front-loaded summer. So let's have a look at the temperature years first of all. So all of these charts that you're going to see in this first part of the video, these are coming from summers that have warmer weather, warmer temperatures I should say, through the early part of the summer, and then became cooler in the second half of the summer. We're going to start off with 1950. We're only going back to 1950 for this particular analogues update. Very often we would go back further than that, into the first part of the 20th century, sometimes even into the 18th century. But because the idea of a front-loaded summer is such a complex thing to actually define, it's very hard to define what you mean by a front-loaded summer, James and I thought we'd best to concentrate just on 1950 onwards. So this is our first autumn following a front-loaded summer in terms of temperature, and it's 1950. And to start us off, it does look very unsettled here. I have to change the highlighter. So we've got a deep trough of low pressure for this autumn, centering right over top of UK, Western Europe as well. The jet stream is coming through rather like that. That does look like a very unsettled autumn, probably quite a cool autumn as well, because the flow will be on a northwest-southeast trajectory. So a very unsettled autumn to start us off from a warm temperature perspective, front-loaded summer. Our next autumn is 1957. Now, you remember through the summer updates, the summer of 1957 was showing up very regularly as a recurring sort of analogue for this summer. It was a front-loaded summer in terms of the fact that the early part of the summer was very warm, and then it became cooler in the latter stages of the summer. So we're following this through, actually, into the autumn. Now, we find that the autumn of 1957 had a ridge out to the west of the country within the 500 millibar flow. It looks like the NAO was quite negative this autumn in 1957, because we've got a southerly, or appears we've got a southerly tracking jet stream going through the Mediterranean. And I would have thought this high pressure out to our west is probably bringing down some quite coolish air at times from a northwesterly direction. But it wouldn't have been an overly unsettled autumn with that high pressure centred out to the west. The next autumn, this one looks very unsettled. This is 1960, and again, really deep trough centering over not just the UK but many central-western parts of Europe. It looks like, again, the jet stream is on a little bit of a southerly track here, so not only very unsettled, probably also quite a cool autumn as well in 1960. But the main thing would be the unsettled pattern. That does look like a very, very unsettled pattern indeed. Notice there is some northern blocking in that autumn going on as well in 1960. 1970 is our next autumn following a front-loaded summer in terms of temperatures. And for this one, so we've got a ridge to our south down here, And we've got, I have changed highlights again, we've got low pressure centering up to the north. So this looks like a classic sort of westerly type autumn. Not overly unsettled, but probably quite unsettled at times. Got a very wet signal, and probably a fairly mildish autumn as well in 1917. A long gap then through to 1992, so this is our next autumn from the front-loaded summers in terms of temperatures, and this one places a very deep trough over and to the east of the UK. The jet stream, again, looks like it's doing something a bit like that, so quite a cool autumn. Certainly October 1992 was very cool. September was quite a coolish month as well, I think, and unsettled. Not sure about November. I don't think November was overly cool, but between the 3 months, that's how the 500 millibar height anomaly stacks up. It does look like quite a cool and, again, very unsettled autumn in 1992. 2006 then, so another pretty long gap through to 2006. Remember, this is another year that was cropping up quite regularly through the summer updates. So the front-loaded summer of 2006, I should say, eventually evolved into the autumn, an autumn pattern that looked like this. And we find that we've got a very deep trough out to our west. But a lot of ridging to the south and to the east of the country, and with the jet stream we're doing something a bit like that. So this is a very mild autumn in 2006. Was quite unsettled. I think all of the autumn months came out with quite a bit of rainfall, but it's a very mild autumn, and of course it encompassed the really hot September of 2006. So far it's a bit of a mixed bag, and it doesn't look like we've got all that much of a trend here with the years that we've looked at so far. Our next autumn is 2010, so not much of a gap here between 2006 and 2010. This time, well, you know what happened in the in 2010, so we get a lot of northern blocking going on up here, particularly so as we get through to the end of the autumn into November. Really severe cold set in November 2010, and then we have this trough which was increasingly pushed further and further south through the course of the autumn, which eventually led us into quite a cool cold pattern even through the course of the autumn of 2010, particularly as we know when we got to November and severe winter weather set in. And then we go on to 2014. So you notice that more recently, over recent years, certainly over the past decade, these front-loaded summers, from a temperature perspective anyway, have become more common. Quite interesting how that's happened, that through the last 10 years, the early summer period has tended to be warmer, and then we've tended to see a deterioration through the second half of the summer. As I say, this is just from a temperature perspective. So this is the year 2014. In some ways, it's kind of similar to the autumn of 2006 in that we've got lots of troughing out to the west, but then we've got this ridge, this time more centred up towards Scandinavia, but generally to the east and south of the UK, we've got quite a strong ridge. And then we're doing something like that with flow and projection. So this is another very mild autumn through the course of 2014. There was some rain at times, but not overly wet in the autumn of 2014. Now, if you add all of these years together, it's perhaps a little bit surprising that it is such a strong signal to be unsettled. But if you add 1950, or the autumn of 1950, autumn of 1957, the autumn of 1960, the autumn of 1970, 1992, 1993, which I don't think I've included actually, 2006, 2010 and 2014. If you add all of those years together, so you'll find a very, very deep trough centred around the UK, and then you will get some northern blocking on average up to the north, but the main feature isn't so much cold weather, it's just for very unsettled pattern through the course of the autumn. So that's looking at front-loaded summers from a temperature perspective, but what about those front-loaded summers from a high pressure or from a pressure perspective? That's what we're going to look at next. in fact, before I do that, let's just go back and have a look at that autumn I missed out, 1993, shall we? So I think that should be there. No, that's 1992. So that's 1993. So that's how the autumn of 1993 looked from a reanalysis perspective. Sorry about this, I must have missed it within the list there. So this is how 1993 looked. Another very interesting autumn, because we had a negative NAO, and it did get quite cold in the end, the autumn of 1993. You had some northern blocking, especially in November, centred around Scandinavia, and that pushed the trough southward. So in some ways that's kind of similar, I suppose, to the autumn of 2010, although the autumn of 2010 became much more severe than anything that happened in 1993. Anyway, all of those years combined, that's how it looks. And yes, overall there is a signal for some northern blocking, but the main thing, and perhaps a little bit surprisingly, is that they tend to be very unsettled autumns. Right, we're going to have a look at autumns that follow front-loaded summers from a temperature perspective next. Now, there will be some overlap with some of these, but not entirely. There are several unique and individual years, such as this one, 1952. So the front-loaded summer of 1952 was more from a pressure perspective as opposed to temperatures, in that the early summer of 1952 wasn't overly hot, but there was a lot of anticyclonic weather, and then that anticyclonic weather deteriorated, became more unsettled in the latter part of the summer. And of course we know that in August 1952 there was devastating flooding down at Lynmouth. And by the way, the Bank Holiday Monday historic video announced this exclusively yesterday. The Bank Holiday Monday historic video, a week tomorrow, will be looking at the events of 1952, starting with flooding in August, going right way through to the autumn and into the winter of 52-53. So that's going to be a bit of an epic. Right, back to the analogues. I'm off on a tangent, as I tend to do. Sorry about that. So this is how the autumn of 1952 looks. Deep trough of low pressure across central parts of Europe and blocking in the Atlantic going north. This is a very cold autumn. We'll be talking about this in that historic video. And the reason for that is that the flow is usually coming in from a northerly or northeasterly direction. So it was quite an unsettled autumn. It's also, perhaps much more notably, really a cold autumn, the second coldest autumn of the 20th century. Now, here's a year that's overlapping. This is 1960, I should say, so we won't dwell on this one too much because we've already seen what happened in the autumn of 1960. But again, we find that very deep trough just centering there across many western and western central parts of Europe, but jet streams on a southerly track as well. Really unsettled autumn. So that one is overlapping from both a temperature and pressure perspective in terms of a front-loaded summer. This one is unique though. This is 1961, so this is a front-loaded summer just from a pressure but not a temperature perspective. And again, this one looks very unsettled. Low pressure is average heights, I should say, but it's extrapolating to low pressure through much of the west of Europe. It looks like we've got a southerly tracking jet stream doing something like that. So that one is also looking very unsettled in the autumn of 1961. 1967 is our next front-loaded summer from a temperature perspective. The autumn, from a pressure perspective, I should say, the autumn of 1967 looks very unsettled. Deep trough again, it's centering this time more to the north of the country, so we're not as far south with the jet stream doing something like that. Wouldn't have been all that cool, overly cool autumn, but it would have been another very unsettled autumn, to say the least. Long gap then to 1979. This is a unique one that's appearing. It didn't appear in the temperature set, but it is appearing in the pressure set. And this one looks just a very zonal autumn. So below average heights, low pressure to the north, above average heights down to our south. That's a default setup autumn, really, bringing the jet stream through like that. Would have been unsettled, particularly so for the north, but not overly so, and probably a mild autumn as well. 1986 is our next autumn. This is quite an interesting one because it looks like overall it's a very zonal kind of autumn again, with lots of low pressure up to the north, high pressure is down to the south, and we're bringing in a strong westerly. However, this is disguising the fact that September 1986 was very, very cool indeed, to say the least. Very cool September in 1986. But for the 3 months overall, actually quite a zonal type pattern through the autumn, and fairly dry as well, especially so down to the south. There was plenty of dry weather through the autumn of 1986. 1989 is our next year. Again, perhaps surprisingly, that the summer of 1989 is regarded as a front-loaded summer. But remember, this is only from a pressure perspective. So 1989 did have a very hot August. This wouldn't appear in the temperature series that we were just looking at. But from a pressure perspective, there was more high pressure around in the early summer of 1989. And then the latter summer, actually, there was more low pressure. So that's why this is included in the series. The autumn of 1989 places a lot of high pressure above average heights around the UK. It's a very quiet and also a very mild autumn, with the jet stream going well to the north. 1992 is our next overlap year. You'll notice there's more years to go at here from the pressure set compared to the temperature set. So it appears that warm early summers and then cooler later in the summer is quite unusual. But from a pressure perspective, actually you do tend to get it happening more often, but you'll have higher pressure in the early summer and then a weakening of pressure later on. This is our next overlap year. This appeared in the temperature series. It's also appearing in the pressure series. The autumn of 1992. Again, we won't dwell on it too long. Very unsettled autumn and quite cool at times as well. 1994 is our next autumn. So this one quite odd pattern. High pressure above average heights over and to the east of the country, below average heights in the Atlantic and up to the north of us, and doing something a little bit like that with a jet stream. It was quite cool and unsettling in September 1994. It became exceptionally mild in November 1994. 1999 is our next year, when we have above average heights to our east, below average heights to the west. Again, quite a mild and a fairly dryish autumn in 1999. 2006 is another overlap year, and this one again, we know what happened. We have the high pressure to our east, we have the low pressure to the west, and we was bringing up that exceptionally warm southerly southwesterly influence in the autumn of 2006. 2010, the next overlap year. And what happens with this one? So we have below average heights to our south, we have the blocking up to the north, and we bring in that very cool north or northeasterly wind, producing eventually really severe weather in the latter autumn of 2010. And then we go through to our final year of the pressure series. Again, it's another overlap year, 2014, where we have again the below average heights to the west and the above average heights to the east, doing something like that with flow and with the jet stream. So there's a lot of variation between these years in the pressure set, but if we combine them all together, what do we finish up with in terms of the overall pattern? And this is it. We finish up again with quite an unsettled looking signal, perhaps a little bit surprisingly. So we tend to finish up with below average heights around the UK and to our west. We tend to finish up with a flow and a jet stream, doing something a bit like that. The one difference with the temperature series is perhaps there is less of a signal for northern blocking for these autumns. So both sets, the temperature set and the pressure set, tend to favour unsettled conditions, but perhaps the temperature set has more non-blocking, so it's probably a cooler set, whereas this set, there is more years in this set as well, but this set tends to be warmer with the autumn, albeit with a very unsettled pattern. Now, if we combine all of the years that we've looked at together, so if we bring the temperature set together with the pressure set, what is the reanalysis? And this is it. This is the reanalysis for all of the years combined, and we find that it's very unsettled again, with below average heights again centering around the country and above average heights going on up to the north of the country. All years combined do look very, very unsettled with these. And in fact, maybe I should explain a little bit better. So, what is actually going on with these charts? I say all years combined, but what's actually happening is that these are the overlap years. I thought I'm probably giving you the wrong impression there, and you'll think that it's every year from the temperature series and every year from the pressure series. Actually, these are the overlap autumns. So we've got 1916, 1992, 2006, 2010, 2014. Not that many of them to go at. But as I say, it's a very unsettled looking signal with below average heights around to west of the UK and above average heights up to the north of the UK. Keep in mind, there is a lot of variation between these years, and particularly from the pressure series, there are several years within there that are coming out with quite a bit of high pressure through the course of the autumn. So it's a complicated one, this, and I'm not sure it could be all that helpful when we come to do the autumn forecast next week. Actually, we're only a week away now from the autumn forecast. I think what we've got to probably do is just wait and see whether it's the temperature that we've got to go with for this summer. Is it a front-loaded summer for England and Wales from a temperature perspective, or is it a front-loaded summer from a pressure perspective? On the face of it, it doesn't appear to make all that much difference either way. But I'm just a little bit wary because the pressure set did have several autumns that weren't unsettled, that had a lot of high pressure within them. Quite a complicated update. I hope you're able to follow it. And I explained it okay in the end. So that's it. That's our final analogues. When I say final analogues, what we might do next week when we do the autumn forecast is we might put these front-loaded summers together with the ENSO analogues that we looked at a few weeks ago, see if we can come up with something there. But that's pretty much the end of the research now for the autumn. All we've got left is one final seasonal model roundup for the autumn, and that's going to be released on Saturday. Next Saturday, and then a week today, next Sunday, we will issue the GasWeatherViz.com Autumn 2017 forecast. And then once that's out of the way, we're into winter updates. Right, gone on for nearly 30 minutes, been a lot to discuss and digest. Hope you found it interesting and informative. Don't forget, later on today, this is going to be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page, where there will be a written report that goes with it as well. Just say also later on, we've got the GasWeatherViz Sunday Roundup, the last one of those for quite a while. And as well today, this evening, we'll have the I think it's the 4th, possibly the 5th, can't remember. Been a very long few weeks, but we'll have another update for late summer bank holiday weekend as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.